Hi, I'm Charles Bossa, a senior product designer based in Kampala. I specialize in designing digital products and systems, particularly in fintech, banking, and service platforms. Over the years, I have worked on solving real user problems, improving internal workflows, and helping teams build products that work in our local context. Today, I am going to help you understand what it means to have a design function and how to probably come up with one, especially in a big structured environment such as banking. So let's start. So in this episode, we are going to talk about around four topics. The first one is why design matters in a bank. Okay. The second one is what does a design function in a bank mean? The third one, what does a design team look like in a bank? And lastly, how do you build this design team in a bank? When you look at banks, especially their IT structure, uh, you have developers, back end and front end. You have analysts, you have data scientists, you have compliance people, you have security, you have the product development managers trying to have the whole thing glued together, application developers, and so on. There is something that usually lacks in that mix. And in most cases, it's not that the function itself is lacking, uh, but it's not represented at the very core. Okay. So you're going to have, say, the product development manager handling user experience, but that handling of user experience is not going to go at the depth that you would expect from someone that is a design professional. And the reason as to why design matters is because this particular person, if put into that mix, may start to look at things at a different level, in a different angle, and might have a different perception from what is currently present in the team. So when you hire a designer uh, as a bank, you're not necessarily hiring someone that is going to come and make your applications look nice. Okay, because even if the applications look nice, it may not still reduce the number of phone calls that the customer support team is going to continue receiving. Okay, and the customer support team is usually dealing with the external customers, but you also have the IT team that is still dealing with the internal operations, the internal platforms that the employees of the bank work on. And a person that is only working on UI, user interface, may not necessarily be in position to handle all these problems. And it looks as though, even without that particular person, the UI designer, the product development manager is mostly looking at the look and feel of the platforms or the applications that the bank is pushing out into the market. So what design actually works on is customer experience, not in a broader sense of what the customer experience professionals and banks work on. We are looking mostly on product specific experience, the user platform interactions. The second one is internal operations. The designers, the design team, if hired into the bank, must be able to work on the internal platforms that employees of the bank work on. We shall look at those internal platforms later on. Then the third one is efficiency. Designers must ensure that there is efficiency in how these different platforms within the banking system work. Efficiency in terms of the internal operations of the bank, efficiency in terms of how these platforms serve the bank's customers. Okay. So now that we have covered why design matters in a bank, let us get to our next segment, which is what a design function actually is. So I have been perusing through LinkedIn, mostly passing through uh, IT departments of different banks, both locally and internationally. And what I get as a difference between what we're having as our local banks here and those at on the international scale, or let's say those that have probably uh, a bigger budget for the IT team, is the absence of certain functions that we would consider design related. Okay, there is a post that is mostly popular in most of our local banks, which is a product development analyst. And that particular person has some resemblance of what a user experience researcher does, though theirs is a little bit broader. And yet, that of a user experience researcher is usually it's product specific, and it doesn't necessarily have a management function unless you are uh, a lead for the user experience researchers, in case you have quite many within the system. But if it's just one, yes, we are mostly looking at a user experience researcher. But like I've said, the banks currently have a function similar to that, and they usually have it as a product development um, analyst. So a design function in a bank, we are looking at user experience researchers. We've just talked about those. We are looking at user experience specialists. We are looking at user interface designers. We are looking at uh, design systems specialists. Okay. Now, breaking them down, user experience research, as we've said, conduct research that is product specific. If you are having a lot of complaints over a specific flow, and those problems are right into the market, you send your researchers into the market, and using research specific standards, they conduct user interviews, they can send in questionnaires, or they can use other means to get that information from the bank's customers, and they are able to synthesize and get um, they get easy to understand data that they then forward to their managers to help them make informed decisions. Okay, these researchers are also vital in coming up with new product concepts based on uh, their market analysis, also based on uh, what is currently available in the ecosystem of the bank. So they are always trying to come up with different ideas on how they can either add new products onto the bank's platforms, existing platforms, all coming up with new products based on need in the market. Okay. So the other ones are user experience designers. These ones are mostly focused on the flows. How do I navigate from point A to point B? Okay. If How can I be onboarded onto being into being a bank's customer? Okay, and is there a possibility of this being done digitally? So user experience designers are able to then come up with the different flows within which you can pass and achieve that particular goal. Then user experience User interface designers, the UI designers, are mostly looking at the look and feel of of the different platforms that the bank has, either internal or external facing, and those ones are not so trivial to the logic that goes beyond that goes in the process of moving from different screens, but they are mostly interested in, let's say, the smoothness or the seamlessness of these movements. But the logic, the system logic, is mostly attributed to the user experience designers. Then we have the design systems specialists. For those that are familiar with branding, uh, and a brand manual, a brand guidelines document, it's a document that helps a brand designer or a brand manager communicate to whoever is going to interact with their brand and ensure that they follow uh, the brand usage, the usage of those assets to in a way that was intended for them to use them. For example, if you've made a logo in let's say a certain shade of green, and then you tell someone to say make for you a website, and as they are using that logo on that particular website, they try to change the shade of that green. There they are changing your brand. Okay, so in order to maintain that consistency, you provide the person working on that website with your brand manual or brand guidelines document, such that they are able to study the different do's and don'ts for any person trying to interact with that brand. So in user experience design or product design, it is a little bit similar. We have design systems, and in those systems, we talk about a number of things. The colors, the brand colors that you're supposed to be using, the system specific colors. We talk about typography. We talk about the different repeatable, assets, which we call components, the buttons, the icons, and so on. So you should be having a person specializing in maintaining that uniformity through a design system. Then for certain banks, they might want to merge some of these functions. So you might find that as they are starting, they only have, say, one function, which is a product designer, that combines all these functions, and maybe later on they decide to scale their design team based on need. What does a design team look like in in the bank's environment? We are going to try and keep it simple. You have product or UX designers, you have UI designers, you have UX researchers, then probably you have a design lead, a person more experienced to try and help glue the team together. The emphasis that this particular team must 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 have is that of collaboration, because design does not function in a vacuum. You're going to be collaborating with security, compliance, data analytics, data scientists, uh, product, and the engineers, and so on and so forth. So the design team that you have must be guided and must have a broad understanding of what they are working on, the industry that they're working on, such that they are able to collaborate with all these other teams. How do you build a design function in a bank? Well, that's very simple. You need to start small, but quality at the very start matters. You cannot bring in a junior designer. You cannot maybe bring in a mid-level designer. You must bring in an experienced designer that is broad in terms of understanding, a designer that is industry specific, because the banking industry is very, very, very regulated. And for a person to come and design for it, they must be able to understand these regulations because they affect most of the design decisions that they are going to be involved in. Then they must be able to think at systems level. Okay. So they must know how core banking systems work. They must know how APIs work because they are going to be integrating a lot of third party platforms into the core banking system. They must be able to know how banking products function, like the loan products, um, loan origination. We've talked about it, uh, onboarding of new customers, investment related products, and so on and so forth. So a designer that you bring in must at least have sufficient experience to come in and then continue learning about how banking works, but with them at least having some basic ground experience on how the financial world works. So build a team. You can start with just one designer. We've talked about that. That designer, once they come in, they must be able to provide value early. Why should they provide value early? Because it also helps the team that they've found understand what impact design is supposed to be having on their team. They must be able to advocate for design-led product development by inspiring confidence amongst the cross-function teams. They must be able to command that confidence amongst the cross-functional teams in order for them to trust them and let them know how they can work together. Then once that is achieved, then as time goes on, you can easily scale by adding new members onto the team, obviously with the guidance of the person that you'll have brought in first. Then lastly, we can talk about the common mistakes that banks usually make when they get these design teams. They tend to hire UI designers only and forget that design is not limited to just the look and feel. And as we've talked previously, UI design alone is not sufficient for a bank to to earn confidence from its users if the underlying problems are not addressed. A good looking mobile banking application will still not address customer issues, and you'll continue having the same drop off rates, the same customer support problems until you're able to dive deep. The other common mistake is you hire designers, but you do not give them design decision making powers, and that is wrong because by its very nature, design is a creative endeavor, and for any creative, uh, they don't necessarily want to be put in the box. Okay, putting a creative in a box means that you're limiting their creative thinking. Okay, and the entire design thinking process requires a borderless or a boundless process. They must be able to make certain decisions based on the briefs they've been given. Sometimes you can give the design team a problem statement, and upon them making the necessary research, uh, get in their findings that the problem statement that you actually gave them is not practical. So they'll still use the same research that they've gotten to try and after having challenged your assumptions or the assumptions of the problem statement that you gave them, they are able then to give you the appropriate problem statement and then design and iterate on that. Okay. So by you giving them decision making power, you're helping them give you the value that you actually want. Then the other common mistake that I see banks make is involving designers late. They spend a lot of time working on products, and at the time of launch, sometimes after launch, when the products are already in the market, they then try to get the services of a designer to come in and improve on the look and feel of the product or improve on the experience, because probably the feedback they've gotten in the market is, yes, it's a good product, but we are having problems interacting with it. It could be good functionally, but the human platform or human system interaction might be still lacking. So at that point, they decide to involve a designer to help them do that. That is a very big mistake, because it might cost you. It's very costly actually. A designer has to be involved in the decision making process right from the conception of the idea. And in most cases, it's actually designers or through their research department uh, that new products are brought to life. So it's always good to have these designers available from the very start and let them pass through their design thinking at the different stages of the product development life cycle, and still involve them even in the implementation of the design by having them interact with the developers, security teams, compliancy, and so on, and still involve them while the product is launched in the market, because it is through their research team that they are going to be able to get as much usage data from the public and consequently improve on the product as they go. Then lastly, the other common mistake that I see banks make is outsourcing design thinking to third-party vendors. Mm. A bank uh, a bank decides to make an improvement, say in their mobile application, and they decide to give the entire process to a third-party vendor. I also work for a third-party vendor, so no offense to them, but I find this a little bit lacking. You would rather give a third-party vendor um, a design prototype or and also a design mockup and have them implement that, okay, than letting a third-party vendor do your research, do the entire design, because they do not have enough information trivia to you as the bank. And in most cases, for security purposes, and also for for the need, for the bank to protect its secrets, they may not be comfortable uh, having these third-party vendors access that information. But it is very easy for a bank to have its employees access that information, because the employees are usually bound by certain rules. And also the employees, given that they're interacting with these platforms internally and they are seeing firsthand how the different cross-functional departments are managing feedback from the market, they have a first-hand picture, okay, and it's that experience that can help the bank manage some of these things internally. So I would advocate more for banks to have internal design teams to come up with design solutions, and then if they want to have the execution done by a third party, I usually have no problem with that. But this this research, the design, it should be done internally. I think that brings us to the close of our podcast. Design in banking, as I've told you, is not it's not about making things look good. Design is about making systems work. It's about making systems work for customers, for the bank's staff, and also for the business of the bank as a whole. And until we understand that, we will keep building systems that work technically but practically fail when you launch them into the market. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.